Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Chair, I just join with other colleagues noting that this is, especially in the current climate, even in the last 72 hours, this is an extremely important bill, given that large amounts of money by a large number of people in a variety of companies and entities over a year or so has been put at risk, often, well, definitely lost. And you see with the latest saga on television between ANZ and ING and the rulings that have been made there, that there is a lot of angst within the community, and you can understand that when people's life savings are invested in good faith, invested under in good faith in respect of the advice that they receive, and when it turns to custody they lose those savings. At best, in one case, as we see reported last night, at 6 or 10 cents in the dollar. For me, this bill is interesting because it strikes at the heart, I think, of what consumers and the community can expect. That is a high degree of standard, professional standards in respect of conduct and professional standards in respect of advice. It's quite simple in my view. If you're purporting to promote a product or provide a service or provide advice, you should be a person who is qualified to give that advice or produce that product, and more especially, you should be in a position where you stand by that advice and you're prepared to put your hand up and be accountable in respect of your conduct around it. Now, obviously, there is a difference between providing advice on, if you like, what sort of product you should buy, what sort of computer you should buy, what sort of washing machine you should buy, and, of course, a more fluid environment in terms of providing advice in respect of investments in financial services, because we have a thing called a market, and that moves and that does strange things, as it's done, if you like, in the last two years at least. But I'm actually mindful of a bit of a correlation with a favourite subject of mine, and that is sort of real estate agents. We went through a similar debate about standards of performance, standards of conduct and standards of advice, and people standing by their work and their advice and their conduct. And I sort of, without getting into that because it's not exactly on point with this, but I am mindful of the correlations and similarities. We had a group of people, the vast majority of the industry, I think, who are good folk, who stand by their work, who do a diligent job and provide diligent advice, but there were issues about the minority. And, of course, issues around whether people were qualified, whether they had the professional skill to provide advice and conduct their work. Greater risks, I think, exist in this area, even more so perhaps than real estate, because you have a tangible asset, you have something called bricks and mortar. In this sphere of operations and this environment, as I say, you have a market that moves and does strange things, and it is more difficult, a bit like trying to nail a jelly to a wall. It's very difficult often when you sift through a financial collapse to try and determine who is accountable, and then go, if you like, to the tertiary level and make a connection between those who've given initial advice to investors to give it a go, to put the $5 or $10 or $1,000 in, and try and ascertain if that advice was given in good faith, if it was given with professionalism, and if people are prepared to stand by it. And of course the difficulty we face with any piece of legislation is you are writing legislation not for the vast majority of practitioners who, whether there was a law or not, would adhere to what best practice, whatever that is, but for that minority who purport to be professionals, who purport to give advice at a professional and qualified standard, who purport to have skills, and then when it all turns to custard, in large part thanks to the advice that they provided, they cut and run. And that is not unique to this sector. It happens, I think, in all professions. One of my colleague, Claire Curran, ran through a few. Even in those professions that consider themselves quite lofty, we have seen people err both in terms of standards of professional conduct and advice. It's been noted that Labor, of course, contributed in large part to this with the passing of twin pieces of legislation establishing the new financial advisors and service providers regime in 2008, mindful of the environment that existed then. I would note in passing that this bill has been slow in its process, I don't make that as a political point. I simply note that I think, given, Mr Chair,
Clayton Cosgrove.
given that, to conclude, given that even in recent days we've seen further uncertainty around financial services in a variety of entities, I think the communities will welcome this, will welcome the fact that it is going to move through now relatively swiftly, and look to this piece of legislation for some degree of protection. The final point I'd make, though, is this. I think there is also a responsibility within our communities. There's an old adage, I think, that if it looks too good to be true, and it is too good to be true, and it smells too good to be true, often it's too good to be true. It's a bit like, going into a casino and, saying, I know I'll come out with more money than I went in with. Well, the house generally always wins. I think there's a duty and an obligation both on legislators in this House and the government, but also on our communities, to improve financial literacy. And I don't mean any disrespect to those in our community. People go in with good faith. They believe folks. You go and see your lawyer because he or she is a professional to do your house conveyancing or whatever. You believe, because they're qualified, that things will go right. You walk into a doctor's surgery, very few of us probably look up and say, could you show me your certificate on the wall to prove you're a qualified GP? We take it as a given. But I think, there has to be, even going, into the future, there has to be a greater effort, I think, within our school system with the young, going right through, but also providing assistance to our adult population in terms of raising our financial literacy. It is a big jump, and I'm a layman in this area myself. It is a big jump from doing your household budget and getting your finances right, make sure your taxes are all sorted, and then being asked to make judgments about where you put your life savings. And as I say, the sort of sniff test is if it looks too good to be true, it genuinely is. And I think there needs to be some support put around this regime in the future to provide financial education and further financial advice for the layperson in our community, to assist them and ensure that they have some confidence. Often, you go into a professional's office as a layperson, you feel a bit intimidated often because they're the sort of flash Harry. You may not want to ask the questions. You may not know, actually, more importantly, the questions to ask. And I think that's where some sort of educational regime or in the consumer affairs space could be supportive of the suit.